the early 1800s, settlers were awed by the mysterious geometric earthworks found across river valleys, bottomlands, and plains in southern Ohio. Ancient builders left a legacy molded in earth in the form of mounds, giant squares, circles, and octagons, the strange and confusing signature of a long-gone culture. Less obvious but equally impressive were the miles upon miles of embankment walls that surrounded isolated hilltops. High above the rivers, fortress-like walls were seen as defensive bastions. And in the frontier mindset of both explorers and pioneering settlers, what else could they be but fortresses? One stood apart, the grandest, most impressive of them all, Fort Ancient. In some ways, Fort Ancient is a fitting name. It is truly ancient. Around 2,100 years ago, builders of Ohio's Hopewell culture began moving earth to form Fort Ancient's walls. Over the course of the next 400 years, generation after generation labored to turn it into one of the greatest single construction projects in all of ancient America. It is probable that Fort Ancient was far more impressive in Hopewell times.
Think about the amount of erosion that has occurred over the last 2,000 years. In 1809, the wall today that is registered at 23 feet was at 27 feet. So in 200 years, we've lost almost 4 feet of soil. So if you take in consideration erosion, slumping over the last 2,000 years, how tall could those earth walls have appeared?
The walls of Fort Ancient are 20 feet high in places and stretch on for 3 miles. So if somebody really wants to get an idea of the scale of labor that these Hopewell people were willing to take on, Fort Ancient's a very good place to go.
As rural hunters and gatherers, the Hopewell were spread thinly across the landscape. In fact, there is little evidence that the Hopewell lived in communities larger than a small cluster of huts, a hamlet. Regional populations were never great enough to adequately garrison a fort with over 3.5 miles of walls. Fort Ancient is bordered by moat-like depressions, but unlike moats surrounding European castles, these are on the inside of walls. It is doubtful that they could serve any defensive role. Finally, the walls are permeated by dozens of gaps. Though some result from over 2,000 years of erosion, most are purpose-built openings. Most likely, Fort Ancient was a sacred site designed to draw people in rather than to repel them. Fort Ancient stands hundreds of feet above the Little Miami River. Still, an important part of Fort Ancient's earthen architecture seems to be centered around water. Today, Fort Ancient is relatively flat and open. This, too, is deceiving. Archaeologists divide the site into 3 geographic units: the broad, flat, and open North Fort, the narrow Middle Fort, encroached upon by steep-walled canyons, and the expansive, flat promontory of South Fort, the first part of Fort Ancient to be constructed. After conducting soil tests, archaeologists discovered that the Hopewell remade this landscape as well. They moved hundreds of thousands of tons of earth to fill and level each of the 3 units of Fort Ancient. Combined, the earth used in the walls and the earth fill in the ravines represent a staggering effort, making Fort Ancient the single most labor-intensive work of its time in ancient America. Some pavements of stone form circles. They may mark special ceremonial places on Fort Ancient's landscape. Their real purpose is unknown.
It has these shallow depressions in the ground that are referred to as ponds. They collect water even today. And some of these ponds are actually ringed by limestone pavements. essentially. Then there are other parts of the site that just have long, winding pavements of limestone, almost like sidewalks or roads made out of flagstone.
2,000 years ago, rivers were water highways for the Hopewell people. It is believed that Fort Ancient was a destination for travelers who may have come great distances in dugout canoes to participate in or witness ceremonies. The South Fork was possibly a formal entrance to the site.
The south overlook has two original twin mounds that are faced on the outside with limestone almost all the way down to the Little Miami River Valley. Imagine canoeing down the Little Miami River, and let's say it might be raining out and you see the limestone coming around the bend or glistening in the sun. That is a welcome mat. And there are three main entrances to Fort Ancient that we are currently aware of. However, there are 23 areas that are paved in limestone.
One entrance was located at the north end and is today marked by two entrance mounds that stand just outside Fort Ancient's walls. This entrance may have served local settlements and those coming overland by trail.
From the Twin Mound area, going north and east for a half a mile, coming back around, the parallel walls were 3 to 4 feet high, separated by about 70 feet, if I'm not mistaken. And the first 500 feet of that area was paved in limestones.
There is strong evidence that the Hopewell used Fort Ancient as an astronomical observatory. It is seen at 4 mounds that mark the corners of a nearly perfect square within North Fork. When sighted from the westernmost marker mound, a center gap in the northeastern wall aligns to the summer solstice sunrise, and the gaps on either side track important moonrises in the lunar cycle.
We have an astronomical alignment system where we've been able to mark the first day of summer and the first day of winter. So we know they're using this site annually.
In building Fort Ancient, the Hopewell people changed both the landscape and the environment, turning it from forest to grassland. In some ways, the construction of Fort Ancient must have changed their lives as well.
Really nowhere in southern Ohio are there really true villages of Hopewell time. They're instead what we call hamlets, clusters of houses, kin-based probably.
Such an immense building project required the normally isolated hamlets of the Hopewell to coalesce into construction camps at the site.
We don't really know for sure in how long of a period in between stages, but we know from 100 BC to AD 290 was the construction. If indeed you're building the earth walls, your habitation area might be a little closer to the work zone. And as you are building upon that work zone, you're going to be moving your village out possibly, or the gathering area where people are.
Whether on a seasonal basis or year-round, here at Fort Ancient, it was a way of life that lasted 400 years. All of these complex, immense monuments were built long before the introduction of corn agriculture or even villages. 2,000 years ago, Ohio's Hopewell culture sent ripples that were felt all across the eastern woodlands. Fort Ancient is a vital clue in revealing a part of this still untold story of ancient America.